In this video, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about different tools you can use while binding books. So the first tool I want to talk about is an awl, that's spelled A-W-L. An awl is basically just a sharp, pointy thing that you use to punch holes when your needle is too blunt to go through paper. Awls are very nice. This one's great because it fits in the palm of your hand. You can hold it like this, and this will help you punch in very exact places. If you don't have one of these and you don't want to buy one, that's totally fine. Just use a nail. This one clearly has plaster on it from when I used it in a previous art show or something, but a nail will work great. You're probably not going to be punching through huge chunks of paper right at the outset, so just use what you have. Any old picture hanging nail with a relatively sharp tip will work fine. You'll also need a needle of some sort. This is a tapestry needle. It's fairly blunt. You can also use slightly sharper needles. Oh, that's the same one. I also have some yarn darners over here. These are typically a little bit sharper. Also has a fairly large eye. For bookbinding, I tend to like shorter needles. It's less to pull through a text block, but whatever you have on hand is fine. And if you already are doing the heavy work of punching through the paper with an awl or a nail, a blunt needle works totally fine. So a needle with a relatively large eye is key. The reason you need a relatively large eye is because often you'll use different types of thread that are quite a bit thicker to sew your book together. So one of the most favorite types of binding material is linen thread. This is actually kind of fancy linen thread. I've had this for a really long time. It looks kind of boring. It's just white, but linen is very, very strong. And this is also acid-free, which means that acid won't eat away at paper that this is sewn through. This is another type of linen thread. This is actually coated in beeswax, which is why it looks kind of shiny. You guys can see that if I straighten it out, it keeps the shape. If I bend it back, it keeps the shape. The great thing about this thread being coated in beeswax is that you get all of the strength of linen thread, but it'll also make your binding much tighter because it will keep a shape more definitely. If I were going to sew, a really important book together, I would probably coat this in beeswax, but I'm not going to worry about it in these next few projects. If you don't have access to these, that's totally fine. We have another great DIY option, and that is our trusty friend, embroidery floss. You can just use embroidery floss as is, right? As long as it fits through the eye of whatever needle you're using, you are golden and good to go. Of course, you're going to need some type of snips. Sewing snips work great, or any type of scissor that you can use to cut whatever you're sewing with is awesome. And then another very handy tool is a bone folder. And yes, this is actually made out of bone. Sometimes you'll find plastic ones as well. Bone folders are really handy to apply pressure to make creases in paper. And this is actually the way you would hold it. If you get seriously into bookbinding, these things are pretty much indispensable. They come in different shapes. They're used for a lot of different purposes, creasing being sort of the primary one. If you don't have one of these, that's totally fine. You can use a bunch of other things in their place. You can use a pencil, right? If I was going to make a fold in a piece of paper, I could lay this on the crease and make my crease that way. Ideally, I would have a pencil that wasn't painted. It's probably some of this yellow paint is going to rub off. I could maybe also use a plastic pen. If I had Oh, if I had longer nails or if I had faux nails, I could probably use that to make a crease in my paper. You can use anything you want, you know, DIY, figure something out. And if you come up with a really great solution that I haven't thought of, please tell me. And then the final aspect you'll want to consider is what type of paper you're using for your book. So this is, let me get this on screen. This type of paper I have here, this is called Mohawk paper. This is a very commonly used type of paper for larger text blocks, or basically the middle of your book, right? If we have the cover on the outside and the cover on the outside, the middle of your book would be considered your text block. This is very light. I want to say this is 25-pound paper. If you look around on sketchbooks that maybe you have laying around, typically sketching paper is around 65 or 75 pounds. You might also, if you look for watercolor paper, sometimes that's around 120 pounds. Poundage of paper is kind of complex, and so I'm not going to go into it right now. But basically, yes, there is a correlation to how heavy a piece of paper is. It's not a one-to-one correlation. I'm going to end up using this because it's what I have available. You might go looking through other things you have around your house or around your studio as well. Let's see. So I think that this one, I use the Mohawk paper. This one, I definitely use the Mohawk paper. This is a good example of using a different type of sketching paper. I want to say that this is definitely a type of colored pencil paper. You guys can see the texture on it. I think this is a Canson middle tint colored pencil paper. It worked great because this book wasn't terribly large. You'll notice all of these books are blank because I have made more books than I have used, and I kind of intended for all of these to be sketchbooks at one point or another. This smaller book I made out of a scrap of Stonehenge paper. Stonehenge is a fantastic heavyweight drawing paper, but I just had some scraps that I cut off and then cut into this book. And then this one, for instance, I made out of the remaining pages of a graph paper sketchbook that fell apart. It was a glued binding and it disintegrated, so I repurposed it. On all of these books, I also have covers. These are all soft covers. They're using different types of paper. This is a screen printed. It has a little bit of texture, but it's just a screen printed paper. In this case, it's doubled over to give a little bit more thickness. You guys can see it's doubled over. Right, here's the back of the paper. This one has a little bit more of a waxy coating because it's kind of a batik style paper. And then this one, I actually made myself a long time ago with a marbling kit. I also doubled this one over because I wanted to see this fabulous marbling on the inside. I'll go over covers in a different video, but it's definitely something to think about. You don't necessarily need to put a cover on your book, but sometimes it gives it kind of that nice finished look to things. So I'm going to leave this video here. In the next video, I'm going to talk about some other bookbinding concerns and considerations.